Hello friends, and welcome to Tim Kirby Russia, where I, radio talk show host and political analyst Tim Kirby, discuss the inner details of how Russia works with you. The politics, the geopolitics, and today we've got a big topic, a topic that's definitely at the epicenter of everything related to Russia and U.S.-Russia relations. That's the Crimea. And we're going to talk about the Crimea with Regis Tremblay, who is a filmmaker, YouTuber, and resident of the Crimea, long-term resident of the Crimea, who is also an American, and he's going to tell us about the real sort of life side of the Crimea, living there, what it's like there, but also get into the whole history and the background, especially the background of how the Crimea shifted over to being Russian again. But before we talk to Regis, we're going to get into a little discussion about the nature of borders, annexation, the shifting of territories, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's start with that. So there are really two major groups of schools of thought, philosophies regarding how borders and territories should be determined. The first is the historical, cultural, and geographic group. Obviously, there are certain big geographical barriers that determine a lot of borders. The Himalayan mountains are not surprisingly difficult to cross. Therefore, a lot of countries seem to meet the edge of their borders somewhere along the Himalayas. That's pretty obvious. There's also many rivers and bodies of water that also determine where borders are. This also makes a lot of sense. Again, the whole geography, the territory, determining where borders and nations are and how they interact with each other is all part of the whole geopolitics thing that we talk about, right? So we've got that. There's a cultural component. Now, this is kind of the weak one. Many people believe that, every culture should be able to have its own territory. And, that sounds nice on a bumper sticker, but it's very difficult because people all over the world are very mixed. And there's a lot of places where they speak 2 or 3 or more languages. And it's kind of hard to cut this perfectly acceptable to everyone border that will divide people the way that they would like to be divided. I think one of the most interesting examples, you'll see some crazy videos on YouTube about this, is the border between Bangladesh and India, where there's all sorts of little pockets and almost like saw blade teeth shapes cut in and out to make sure that everyone's happy. They're probably not. But, it can be definitely hard to make things line up culturally. So cultural reasons are usually the weakest. Then there's also the historical reason why borders are the way they are, which is essentially, it is the way it is. The colonizers came to Africa. They fought some wars, worked things out between themselves. That's where the borders were, and that's mostly where they are today. Of course, there's some exceptions to that, but a lot of strangely shaped African nations have their strangeness due to European influence and things. Basically, when those countries got their independence, they had their borders determined to be the way they were at the moment of independence, and so they remain that way today, even if it makes no sense culturally, linguistically, or even geographically. So that's kind of the first group of reasons, and you'll see why they're in one big group real soon. Now, the second group is much easier to understand. It's might makes right. Borders are the way they are because one country or entity or empire is able to enforce the shape of those borders because they have the tanks, guns, and men to do it or take it. And a good example, going again to the Spanish-speaking world, of this sort of might makes right argument would essentially be the war between America and Mexico, the Mexican-American War, which has a very nice logical name in the late 1840s. Now, as America was spreading to the west, Mexico was actually spreading to the north. There was sort of a race to expand towards the what we call the West Coast today. And before America got there, on the maps anyways, Arizona, New Mexico, California, those kind of areas were sort of officially part of Mexico with their Spanish names and all that. But there was a war, and that war was fought with men and musket, and the United States won that war. In fact, I once read a book that they said that of the 10 most important wars in human history, or these battles, it was really the Mexican-American War that might even be the most important, because America would have never been able to have become the superpower it is today without that total control of going from the Atlantic to the Pacific and all that giant territory, because if they would have lost the war to Mexico, all that would belong to Mexico today. Everything, maybe even including up into Washington State, or heck, parts of Canada would all be part of this giant Mexican nation, and who knows, maybe they'd be the world superpower. We can't really say for sure, but the main thing about that is it is a perfect example of might makes right. So that sort of leads into the Crimea. So why is the Crimea part of Russia now? Well, because Russians could argue that because of the special status it had, being the sort of weird gift from Khrushchev to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, it continued to have that special status into the new Ukrainian state that came to be in the 90s, and due to that special status, it was able to have a referendum and leave. That's one argument. But in some ways, you could use the old Russian expression, it was yours, now it's ours. And because of that referendum, and because Russia was able to bring it back home, it is back home. And conversely, if we look at the breakup of the Soviet Union, I mean, look at how much territory Russia lost. And the real reason that it lost this territory that had been part of it for hundreds of years, some of that territory that voluntarily chose to get become part of the Russian Empire to gain protection from being exterminated by other less friendly, powerful societies, that all was torn away from Russia. Why? Because it lost the Cold War. Because it was weak. Because it wasn't able to hold that territory. Because the key thing to understand is, neither Russia nor the United States, the West, can back down on the Crimea. If Russia were to give up its only warm weather port, forever surrender the Black Sea, that would be a crushing blow that could actually destroy Russia itself. Because if one part of Russia breaks away, a lot more could break away, like it did in the 1990s. And that would be basically a death blow to Russian civilization. That would be the big tombstone. So Russia absolutely cannot back away from the Crimea, no matter what sanctions are levied, no matter what the United States does. It's just a non-option. In fact, maybe even Russia, kind of risked starting a thermonuclear war over retaining the Crimea. The Russians are serious about it. Now, on the west side, the United States, maybe the United States has a little bit more room to eventually give up on this issue. But if the United States wants to be the global hegemon, the big unquestioned dog, then it can't just let Russia take back parts of its former territory, because Russia has so much former territory. And as Zbigniew Brzezinski said, Russia will never be able to become a superpower if it doesn't have the Ukraine. And right now, still a lot of Ukraine is still burning with fires of rage because it wants to come back home. So, if the United States did just give up on the Crimea and maybe even issue a nice apology, that means that it would embolden Abkhazia, South Ossetia, Transnistria, and so on, to all make the big move to come back home. And for a Washington that wants to be the global dominant force, that's not a very pretty picture. Okay, guys, that might have sounded a bit cold-blooded, but unfortunately, that is the nature of international relations and geopolitics. But anyways, let's warm things up by talking to Regis Tremblay, who is a filmmaker and long-term American resident of the Crimea. He's a real interesting guy, and he also does a big series of interviews on his YouTube channel. You should go watch that after you're done watching this interview, which starts right now. Okay, Regis, let's start out at the core of the issue. Why is this tiny, tiny region that no one really cared about until a few years ago the reason why the two great nuclear powers could go to war with each other and kill us all?
I think it's important to go back and look at what United States, not just foreign policy, but the objectives and the strategy it's based on. And that is to create chaos along Russia's border, with the sole intent of accomplishing a couple of things. One, destabilize Russia, discredit Putin, and cause his popularity to drop, okay? And three, the real overarching goal that America has been trying to do since Harry Truman in 1945 is to break up and balkanize Russia and to finish the job that the Harvard boys and the Chicago boys under George H.W. Bush and Clinton didn't complete in the 1990s. That is the pillage and rape of Russia.
Wow, now that's the kind of blunt answer you're not going to get anywhere else when talking about Russia. But if you believe this, how exactly is Washington going to go about all this, especially in terms of the Crimea?
One of the goals that America wanted by keeping Crimea in Ukraine was to take possession of Russia's only warm water port in Sevastopol, where their fleet, the Black Sea Fleet, is located. Russia was never going to let that happen, and so America had to punish Russia. And there we are today.
Well, Washington was unable to get rid of Russia's navy from the region. But, economic sanctions could be taking their tolls. Perhaps it's Washington who's going to win the long game.
No, not at all. People here are really happy to be back in back in Russia, because Crimea has been in Russia since the time of Catherine the Great, the time of American Revolution in 1776. And the thing that people always say, well, you know what? Russia just took back Crimea. And my response to all of this was, from time immemorial, whenever there was an empire or Rome, for example, conquered other places, what they did is they redrew the boundaries. It's happened after every war in all of history. People should remember World War II. Forget World War I for now. World War II, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill got together right here in Yalta to redraw the map.
Yeah, the U.S. and Britain were perfectly happy to sign off on the Crimea and Ukraine being part of the eternal Soviet Union.
They created countries out of nothing, including Israel. And so borders have always shifted, and it's a significant problem, obviously, when it comes to resolving age-old disputes. And this is an example of it again. But Crimea, I want to emphasize, has been part of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, since the time of Catherine the Great. It was just a return to where it really belonged.
Okay, so you consider the Crimea to be eternally Russian. But why exactly are you an American living there?
Tim, I first came to Russia in 2016 after traveling to Odessa in 2016 on the anniversary of the massacre at the Trade Union Hall in Odessa. I received an invitation to come to Moscow, and I jumped at it because I was just finishing a film, my film 30 Seconds to Midnight, and because the basis of the film was this impending crisis between Russia and America in terms of nuclear Armageddon, I had to come and find out what the Russian people were like and what Russia was like, because I didn't believe the American propaganda.
Yeah, I kind of did the same thing. Growing up as a kid in the 1980s, I found out that I'm entirely Slavic, which made me entirely made up of the genetics of the nations of the Warsaw Pact. So for some reason, I was always the bad guy in all the movies, and I kind of wanted to understand what was so bad about this. What is this system? Who are these Ruskies? What's this whole deal? It was very intriguing. And when I got over here, I kind of realized maybe I was on the wrong side of the line all along.
So that was in 2016. I came back again 3 more times because I had to find out more, and I had wonderful opportunities to travel to many cities, towns, and villages in Russia. I became convinced, absolutely convinced, that the American narrative and propaganda in terms of Russia was completely 100% false. On each of those trips, I came to Crimea, and I fell in love with Crimea. It's not difficult to do. It's a most beautiful place, a historical place, a cultural place. The climate is perfect. I've been living in the United States, in the state of Maine, where it's winter and very severe winters, and I was looking not to have to shovel snow anymore. And then I found out that my focus in my filmmaking had now centered not only on Russia and trying to educate Americans in terms of Russia and Russian people, but now I started to discover the incredible beauty of Crimea that I just described culturally, historically, in literature, music, art, archaeology, you name it. It provided another resource, another inspiration to focus my work on.
Well, Regis, you explained to me that you came here because you wanted to see the other side of American foreign policy. But you could have gone to Korea, Vietnam, the Middle East, a bunch of different places in Latin America. Why come here to Russia?
Basically, in my film, 30 Seconds to Midnight, the thesis was there's only two major threats to life on the planet: climate change, environmental degradation, the inability of the planet to be able to sustain 8, 9, 10, 12 billion people. And the second was nuclear war between Russia and China, which could happen today. And so that was why I started focusing on this American foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia. But I have been concerned about American foreign policy. By the way, my undergraduate degree was United States history. And I learned nothing about the true American narrative until I went to Jeju Island in South Korea in 2012 to make my first feature documentary. And I discovered things that my country had done in Korea before the conflict started. And it was scandalous. It had been classified completely and then was just recently declassified. And I made a film that really exposed what America had done in American foreign policy in 1945, 46, and 47 before the war, the conflict in South Korea. And that led me to start researching what American foreign policy had been doing, not just since 1945, but all the way back to 400 years ago, when the white male European colonizers came to this continent and began genocide, slavery, the stealing of land and resources, and that has continued ever since. And in terms of my understanding of my country and what it means to be a citizen of the United States, the bubble burst. In fact, it blew up because I started to realize that the American narrative from 400 years ago was based on a lie. And that lie continued to expand with one lie upon another lie and another lie. And so American narrative history since the beginning, take it right through 1776 till the present day, has all been a narrative written by the elite class to interpret history as they wanted it to be interpreted. And I have learned since that the idea of being an American is not an exceptional nation, the shining city on a hill, the country that was supposed to be an example of freedom and democracy and to spread that around the world. As I looked at what America had been doing for 400 years, and in my own lifetime since 1945, in those countries you just mentioned.
Okay, Regis, if the American Empire is so bad and evil, then why does the Russian Empire get a pass from you?
You know as well as I do, there was Imperial Russia, and before that, there were different versions of what that territory was. But after Imperial Russia, there was a revolution and Soviet Union, then the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then whatever you want to call Russia now, from 2000 to 2021, under President Putin's administration, is a completely different story. You cannot grab anything from the past and say, well, Russia now is a colonizer. Really, where? Russia now is an aggressor. Really? Uh, okay, Vietnam, a proxy war. Syria, maybe a proxy war. How many bases does Russia have in all these countries around the world? Who is this current day Russia attacked? They'll say, well, Georgia. Well, they don't know the whole story about Georgia. And so Russian foreign policy, from my research and my interviews with some significant Russian experts, and one in particular in the Putin administration, a couple of journalists, is that Russia's policy has been, and the people believe this, to defend the motherland. And I think, to me, this has become really clear, especially now in terms of this conflict that the United States and NATO have provoked between Ukraine and Donbass. They're saying Russia's the aggressor. And now look at Russia moving all these troops right to the border. Well, when you ask any Russian or any Russian expert or journalist, why are they doing that? They will tell you it's not to invade Ukraine, it's to defend the motherland. And I think, for me, as I've looked at Russia over the last 20 years and the last 6 years, well, since 2016 when I've been here, so what is that, 5 years? I look at Russia's actions in the world. I look at Russia's rhetoric in the world, and all I see are really two things: are willing to cooperate as equal partners with anybody, and number two, we will do everything it takes to defend the motherland. Russia has a policy against a first strike attack on anybody. You can't say that about America. And America has never disavowed that written first strike policy, basically to destroy Russia. Now it probably applies to China.
So do you see any difference between rule from Moscow and rule from Kiev?
No, this is a great question. It's important and it's timely. When I first came to Crimea in 2016, and I traveled, I saw parts of Simferopol, Sevastopol, Balaclava, and then the road up to Yalta and some surrounding towns and villages. The roads were horrible, terrible. Buildings in certain parts of Sevastopol and Simferopol were in terribly disrepair. The infrastructure had been crumbling. I saw no construction, no new construction, no development, nothing. And I went, wow. And what people told me was, under the Ukraine, they took our money and they never reinvested it back in the infrastructure, in education, and medical healthcare. Each year coming back, what I saw, and it's because of Russian investment, I saw improvements immediately in the road. I saw brand new power plants. I saw new construction everywhere. Tim, I got to tell you, in each successive year, and today, to this day, even in Little Yalta, there are construction cranes everywhere. In Sevastopol, it's a town that now, and Simferopol as well, the population is increasing exponentially. The reason is there's work. So people are coming from other parts of Russia and former Soviet countries to work in construction, in service industry, in healthcare. There's jobs everywhere because it's exploding. And today, I have to tell you, there's not much that I can tell you that's lacking in the Crimea. I experienced their healthcare up close and personal, Tim. I had to go to the dentist, and I had to go twice with the x-rays that they do, cleaning of the teeth, filling a couple of teeth that were kind of broken. Parts of my tooth had been broken off. It cost me $250. That would have cost me over $1,000 in the United States. I broke my hip last October. I fell at night down on the promenade right by the Black Sea, and I missed some steps, didn't see it at night, and broke my hip. I was taken to the hospital. Incredible care. I couldn't believe it. I didn't have a private room. I was with 3 other guys, but it was delightful. I had hip surgery 2 days later. The doctors were incredibly professional. They had state-of-the-art equipment to do surgery in their surgical suites, and the aftercare was incredible. I have to tell you this. It cost me about $6,000 out of pocket. I have friends in the United States that have had hip transplants, knee transplants that have cost them upwards of $60,000, $70,000. So what can I say about life now and my experiences in Crimea, whether it be infrastructure, education, brand new hospitals, outstanding medical care, highly professional physicians, surgeons. There's no lack of food. We don't shop in a grocery store. We shop at the outdoor markets for fresh food, farmers' food, etc. There's no comparison to what I found in 2016.
Okay, thank you very much, Regis. In the near future, we're going to have the full uncut interview with Regis where he's got a few more stories to tell, and you'll definitely enjoy that. Remember, guys, please share these videos. It is very important that you share these videos around. I do not have an advertising budget. I cannot control the big tech repression machine that is keeping any sort of intellectual topic pushed down to the very bottom, unless it's some ridiculous garbage that they agree with. So anyways, guys, I need your help. Like, share, subscribe. I'll be back with you real soon. Till then, this is United.